Good morning, I'm Niva Retimanu, and this is your morning news fix for Friday, 5th of April. In this update, Kaipara's mayor says he's delighted as the government imposes referenda for the establishment of Māori wards. The bill reinstates a legal requirement for local councils to poll communities before establishing Māori wards. Some councils that set up wards under the previous government's legislation will have to scrap them. Kaipara Mayor Craig Jepson told Mike Hosking it brings some democracy back to local government.
What is more democratic than actually having a referendum of your citizens asking them what they want for their democracy?
But the Green Party's Māori development spokesperson, Huhana Linden, says it's a racist step backwards. She says the government's implementing another barrier to Māori representation. The banking sector's reviewing the rules governing when scam victims are reimbursed. There's been growing criticism of retail banks' lack of consumer protections and the threat of regulatory intervention from government. Many victims who've been fleeced of their life savings are ineligible for compensation under current rules because they were tricked into authorising the payments. Joey Dwyer reports.
Banking Ombudsman board member and head of Consumer NZ, John Duffy, says those rules are skewed in favour of banks. He says the Banking Ombudsman and many others are pushing for a review of the scheme's rules, along with mandatory fraud prevention elements, to force banks to up their game.
The Northland Regional Council is calling on the government to fund critical emergency services. As part of its long-term plan, the council is consulting on a proposal to stop its funding of emergency services to free up more than $1 million a year. It wants the government to fill that gap and is questioning why they haven't been funding it properly in the first place. Health experts say changes to who can get the free flu vaccination are a missed opportunity to reduce inequities. Free influenza vaccinations are now available to people over 65 with long-term conditions, pregnant or with specific mental health conditions. It's no longer funded for people under 12 and Māori and Pacific people aged between 55 and 64. Otago University bioethics lecturer Elizabeth Fenton says Māori and Pacific adults have a higher risk of dying from the flu.
We have created some new access barriers to flu vaccination for people who are particularly vulnerable.
School Strike for Climate is set to return bigger than ever today. A total of more than 100,000 people are expected to strike at events throughout the country. Their 6 demands to the government range from conservation protection to humanitarian assistance for Palestinians and upholding Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Spokesperson Nate Wilborn says that the rallies, marches and activities aren't just focused on climate justice.
We've got people who are primary school students up until, retired people coming along. It's an intersectional strike.
And in sport, the Storm have continued the Broncos' NRL League misery in Melbourne since 2016, clinching a 34-32 thriller. Saudi Arabia will host the WTA tennis finals from 2024 to 2026 as part of a 3-year deal with the Women's Tour. Colin Munro has told New Zealand Cricket he's available for the T20 World Cup in June. The 37-year-old freelancer hasn't played for the Black Caps since February 2020. I'm Niva Retimanu, and that's your latest news fix. We'll be back with the next update at midday from the Newstalk ZB newsroom.